Hello, Michael.
Hey Sam, how are you?
I'm very well. Yourself? Do you prefer Mike or Michael?
Mate, I'll answer to anything. My friends call me Mick, so you can go with that.
Awesome. Um,
Uh, Ian said he's just going to be a couple of minutes late.
okay, no worries. That's all right. Well, I suppose now you don't mind if I record this for my YouTube channel. Essentially, it's literally just my journey through the ecological dynamics constraints-led approach for grappling.
No,
Yeah,
sounds awesome.
awesome, excellent. I'll give you that link later. It's a lot of it does come down to I'm literally just doing the like the templates in the books and doing kind of a review of my coaching. So
Yeah, cool.
but I've got a lot of people in the game that are asking questions. So yeah, I'm really stoked that that you've come on board to do this. So and I've got some specific questions for you as well, because you're in Taekwondo, is that correct?
So that was where I did my PhD research. So I was embedded with them for maybe about 4 years in the lead into the Rio Games. But I haven't done as much work with them the last few years.
Okay.
So I'm probably a bit out of touch in that sense. But yeah, my PhD was 4 years embedded with the AIS Combat Center. Is what it was called at the time, where they brought together all 4 Olympic combat sports to try and share resources and knowledge and just learn from each other.
Yeah, awesome. So how about give a bit of background as to who you are and sort of any kind of information for the viewers as such.
Yeah, sure. So I guess I might be referred to as a pracademic. I'm a practitioner and also a researcher in skill acquisition. So most of my time has been spent working on the industry side, so working with sports and coaches and athletes. And then just recently I've shifted roles to a 50-50 role between the AIS, where I'm a skill acquisition specialist, and now at the University of Canberra, where I'm a teaching research position as well. So in terms of my background, I first got into CLA and ecological dynamics back in my undergraduate years. I was very lucky to have Keith Davids and Ian Renshaw as lecturers at the time, and the way I got myself through uni was I coached at my local cricket club, and at a high school I coached footy as well. And so I'd sit in their lectures in the morning, and then in the afternoon I'd take the ideas and play around with them with my own coaching. And then I couldn't quite figure out what to do when I graduated, so I knocked on Ian's door and asked him if there was an opportunity to keep working with him or keep studying. And that's when I started my I guess research career as a research student and now academic, but most of that has been embedded in the applied side of things. So I did my PhD at the AIS in the Combat Centre, worked for a few years as a skill acquisition specialist at the South Australian Sports Institute, worked with a few sports there in the lead into Tokyo and the Tokyo Olympics, and then came back to the AIS as a full-time skill acquisition specialist, worked with a few sports there, and now just shifted roles.
Yeah, awesome. So you've got quite a breadth of experience here. Ian's just about to arrive as well.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting things about skill acquisition is that our expertise is not necessarily sport specific, but our expertise is in the principles and frameworks that support learning and their applicability across any context.
Yeah, awesome. Hi there, Ian.
Hi, sorry, mate. No, sorry, I'm late. I stuck in traffic a little bit.
No, that's all right. That's all right. I was just getting a bit of background from Mike as to how he started and what he's been working on, and his journey through the constraints-led approach. It's really interesting, and might throw it over to you. If I can get you to give a little bit of an intro to yourself.
Yeah. I'm obviously in Renshaw. Currently work at QUT, associate professor, skill acquisition, motor control, whatever you want to call it. Doing some coaching as well.
Yep.
Been here since 2007. 4 years in New Zealand before that, in Auckland. Before that, worked in Sheffield Hallam with Keith Davids, who's obviously a huge name in this area. He's also my PhD supervisor.
Oh, awesome.
And before that, I was up in Teesside, working at Teesside University, Teesside Poly as it was when I started. And before that, did 4 years of teaching PE after doing a postgrad in teaching at Loughborough, and my first degree is in human movement in Leeds. So there's a potted history. My sporting background is mainly cricket, some very rubbish football.
I'm assuming football is soccer in this country.
Real football.
Real football, yeah.
Soccer is only what Americans play, and a few Aussies.
Well, I really appreciate you both joining me today. This is awesome. I've got quite a few questions. I think a lot of the questions that are being that I'll ask are in some ways a bit of confirmation / validation. Am I doing this right? But I've been speaking to a number of, so not only my own coach, but coaches left, right, and centre, and they've all got similar questions. And I think I kind of know the answer because I've not know it in depth, but ecological dynamics is essentially you're doing ecological dynamics if you are doing ecological dynamics because you're testing, measuring, fixing, that kind of thing. So what I wanted to do to start off with is get a simplified definition of ecological dynamics and the constraints-led approach. I know it's not that simple, but but if you could distill it down to a little soundbite that I can share around.
Am I doing this bit?
You'll be much better. You'll be much better than me, Ian. I've heard you on podcasts before.
So, ecological dynamics is the theory or the meta theory that sits behind the constraint-led approach, which is the practical application of the theory through a non-linear pedagogy. Now, that sounds like a huge, complicated mouthful, which is probably one of the challenges in the area, to be fair. So ecological psychodynamics is brought together really by two major theories. The idea of ecological psychology, which was really promoted by Gibson, really going back probably into the 50s, but one of his first major publications was 1966. And then the big book that most people have read is 1979, 1986, whichever version people have got. But what he came up with he suggested that perception and action are coupled, and that directly your actions are connected directly to what you perceive, and what you perceive is impacted by the way you act. So that's it. We often see it in a linear model that you perceive and then you act, but here acting actually creates information that changes the way that you move, the way you act as well. So it's a reciprocal cycle. It's called perception action coupling. And this idea is that the information is out there, and we just have to learn to pick up and use this information to guide our actions, rather than having to create and the gap between perception and then something happens in the brain and then we act, which is the old sort of information processing idea. So this is, was radical in its time, and probably for a lot of people is still radical now. But there's a reasonable amount of evidence that shows that the information in the environment shapes the way you move and the way you act, and that informs then the way that we set up training, the way that we understand learning, etc., etc. The dynamics bit comes from the idea of dynamic systems theory, which is an idea of self-organization under constraints. And these are ideas, principles that are pervasive to all different aspects of society. So, for example, a weather system is a self-organizing system. You get one change in constraints and it changes the whole patterns of behavior. So, and humans are thought of as a self-organizing system that are shaped by the interacting constraints. So what are constraints? Difficult word, because it has the connotations of negative. It's a constraint on you, but it actually, what we were talking about really, or Newell was talking about, and we obviously followed that, is that they're the boundaries that shape the behavior. So they can be broken up into three categories. So the individual constraints, so all the differences within the individual. So that in fighting, it could be the structural constraints, the height, the mass. Oh, no, don't keep off mass. I've got that one slightly wrong. But limb length, for example, could really impact the way that you fight. There are then functional constraints, which are things that can change sort of rapidly or in the longer term. So your weight, there would be a functional constraint. So you can change your mass. Probably takes a little bit of time. Although I was hearing a story this morning that really worried me, was that she was at a session, she was doing a Pilates session last night, and this mother was saying her daughter is in the Taekwondo program. I'm not going to say where. She's 12-year old and she's having to lose weight in preparation for a bar. And that worried me to death. She got 2 hours to lose 4 kilos or whatever it was. So they're putting her in sweat bags, and I think that is dangerous and you know, something that needs to be reported, if not looked at. But there we go. So, but normally weight would take a longer time to change. Fitness is another aspect that we can change over time. So they're longer. Some of these things can be longer functional constraints, but they also can change in the moment. So things like emotions can change from moment to moment. So this is what Mike found with some of his work. You know, that the setup of the session will affect the emotions that people, you know, display or feel or whatever. And intentions, of course, are a really important individual constraint, a functional constraint that changes from moment to moment. So if you're fighting to win versus fighting to not hurt your mate because you're training with him, then you fight differently. You know.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I actually have an example of that recently. So the emotions changed how the practice sort of resulted. So, all right, well, that's cool. I do.
Tell us your story. That'd be great to hear your story.
Yeah. So, I suppose I'd had just a rough night. Like I train in the mornings, so I'd had just a rough night. You know, the toddlers running around causing havoc. It's just put me. You know, I wasn't in a good frame of mind. Went into training and just wasn't. You know, was a bit pissed off, whatever the case may be, or just annoyed. And so at the end of the lesson, I was like, yeah, I didn't feel in as much flow as I have in the past, you know. And I'll get to that aspect because I mentioned that in our email, my initial email. But yeah, the emotion that I felt, like, and normally in previous classes it wouldn't have mattered, like it would have sort of cleared it out. But I was because I tend to find myself in flow so often now. I could tell straight away, hey, I wasn't in flow, you know, throughout this lesson. Whereas, you know, I get in flow at the end of a lesson doing sparring for the like 15, 20 minutes that we do sparring.
Yeah,
I'd be somewhat in flow there, and then I'd go, yeah, well, I've got the benefits of flow. Whereas, you know, it might be 5 minutes out of that entire time. Whereas I suppose I could jump straight into that So the flow states, I was a big sort of early on in my martial arts journey. It was one of those things that I wanted to learn. So, and you'd hear it through the ancient wisdoms and that sort of thing, where you get the mind of no mind, and you'd be able to moving meditation, do this stuff without thinking, etc., etc. And I mean, I practiced for years and got none of that, and then sort of within 3 months of doing jiu-jitsu, I actually pulled something off, without thinking about it, and had this, subtle, incredible experience where I was like, oh, that's amazing, I just did that. And and the more I looked at those at the zone, I looked at sort of did a bit of research around it, and one of my friends did his dissertation on it early on in the 2000s. So it's obviously developed since then. But I mentioned Stephen Kotler, but he talks about Csikszentmihalyi and how Csikszentmihalyi has the 8 things that get you into flow. And it's like complete concentration on the task, clarity of goals and reward, and immediate feedback, transformation of time, intrinsically rewarding, effortlessness and ease. There is a balance between challenge and skills. And this one is the perception action that we're talking about. Actions and awareness are merged, losing consciousness and rumination. And there's complete feeling of control over the task. So I just saw kind of a meld almost instantly with this field of study and CLA, ecological dynamics. Is there any other areas of like fields of study that you made connections to, but maybe timing, funding, that kind of thing, couldn't make it?
Sorry, I'm not sure what you're asking.
As in any other sort of, so Mike, you sort of had some ideas mentioned before, so I can sort of see you have a bit of a thought there.
I think I was connecting to your idea around emotions and feelings and how they influenced your training behavior. Because that was one of the things that we explored in my PhD. So it was actually born out of a question that combat sports in Australia had. Like, I try to make most of the research I do generally trying to answer questions that coaches are interested in. And they were interested in how to create more pressure in training. So we came up with some methods to be able to better capture affect and cognitions and things like that in training, and to actually explore the manipulations of pressure and whether or not they work. But we're also just interested in exploring the athlete experience during different kind of and common combat practice activities as well. And we found like really strong relationships between, how coaches were manipulating their tasks and then how athletes were thinking and feeling within those. And the example you gave is, it's a little bit different. You're talking about some outside of training stuff and how that influenced, your ability to maybe focus as much as you wanted in training. But we were able to show that some of the practice activities can have that similar sort of effect as well. So like a common one in Taekwondo is they'll have some of the heavyweight females fight some of the males because there's not that many heavyweight females. But we found as a practice activity, it actually wasn't that great for the heavyweight females we had, because they were too worried about the strength and power discrepancies. So instead of actually, feeling like they had an adequate challenge or an appropriate challenge, they were just too worried about getting knocked out or smacked in the head.
Yeah, okay. Right.
So if you want to nip back to finish off the constraints, so the other 2 categories of constraint are task constraints, which are the rules of fighting, the outcome, how the scoring systems, the current score within a bout. The referee, you could argue, is a task constraint or actually an environmental constraint, which we won't get into, I don't think, at this point, about what's a task and environmental, unless you really want to. And then you've got things like environmental constraints include the physical constraints of the environment. So within about, it could be the mat, the surface, or like you could argue that's a task constraint again, but we'll leave it as an environmental constraint. The temperature, the humidity in a hall, the lighting. So how the lighting might affect the way that you're fighting.
Yep.
I've certainly tried to play badminton in completely glass walls, and it's, you can imagine, really quite difficult. That could be impacting as well. The crowds, if there are any crowds around, the impact of coaches as well. So that sort of brings us on to cultural constraints, and they really important and sit behind. For example, the way that you coach has got a historical, social, cultural constraint. There is an expectation that this is what training looks like, because that's how we've always trained. So there's one of the challenges of coming with a different approach to the ideas, is going, what are you doing? This is not coaching. You know, this is what coaching is. So that, and the culture that the coach creates is really crucial to learning, as well as the culture of the club, for example. So it might be that different clubs have a reputation for being, having a typical approach that is representative of that club. It's easier to think of that in terms of football clubs. Like Team X play in a certain way and are expected to, be like this, whereas Team B have got lunatic fans and crazy, so there's that cultural side of things as well.
I feel like in martial arts in particular that those socio-cultural constraints are just hugely influential, and maybe conflict with some of the contemporary approaches that you might be trying to apply with your coaching. Like straight away you have the linear belt system, right, where you have to master something before you can progress to the next level, which is not really aligned to maybe non-linear approaches to learning. And then I think about like where coaching approaches potentially can come from, and there's I'm not quite sure about some of the non-Olympic combat sports, but I know in the Olympic combat sports the most successful nations are generally out of Asia or Eastern Europe, and there's a look there for training methods because they're so successful. But if you look at the training methods, they're very volume based, as opposed to maybe I'd say they're more of a quantity rather than a quality approach is taken, and within those conditions they can do that because they have so many athletes, whereas in places like Australia we don't have many athletes, and those volume based approaches just won't work. So I think that's where we have to look to the motor learning skill acquisition literature to try and implement some more evidence based approaches, but that conflicts with those socio-cultural constraints which are so heavily ingrained in the sport. Like, I'm interested, Sam, as a coach who's trying to explore this new method, how is it for you navigating that?
That's a great question. I actually sort of discovered it about October last year. My coach approached me with it, and he said, "This is." So I am part owner of a gym, so my coach is my business partner as well. So we sit down quite often, and he approached me and said, "I'm looking to do this kind of gamification thing," and my instant sort of thing was, no, I don't get it. I don't like. I could see some of a benefit to it, but I was very much in that. And this has happened across the entire grappling world. Well, sorry, the entire BJJ world. I'll be specific with my language there because I know that judo has been implementing it for decades, or a portion of it in Canada and some in America. But yeah, when I came across it, I sort of initially had some pushback, and there's actually I was writing a blog, and there's actually like this 2-week window where I went from what is this? I'll have a look into it, to I'm all in, let's go. This is working for me. This is working. My not only my skill level, but my understanding, my visualization, all this stuff just improved rapidly, and I just immersed myself into it. So, I read your book.
Yeah, $2 more. Thank you.
Yes, yeah. I actually bought it as well. I'm some way through this. This
Right.
is a little bit more, significantly more dense than this.
Yeah.
But I think this was a good stepping stone for me, because, actually, the Rob Gray's books, How We Learn to Move and Learning to Optimize Movement, they gave me a good stepping stone, so a sort of a pathway in.
Right.
I really like this. I've got a lot out of this. The templates I was saying before you jumped on, that the video series that I've been doing has literally been me with your templates up on the screen.
Oh, brilliant.
And just doing like a video review of all of my coaching, like each coaching session. Sometimes I remember to record them as well, so I'm able to put them up. But it was kind of over Christmas. Obviously, everything sort of shut down for a bit, but I just got all in. And one of the things that I noted was initially there was a bit of pushback, like what I did. I was like, is that really something that we want to go down? I was finding that I was trying so hard to systemize my learning that I was kind of not seeing the forest for the trees, and even the things that I was doing that helped me improve rapidly, being where I am in my grappling journey. Like, I'd put myself in a position and go, okay, all I want to do is this. This is all I'm going to do. And then I'd do that for 3 weeks, and then I'd move on to something else that I wanted to get better at. And so when I think that was what happened in that 2-week period, is I went, hang on, that's exactly how I got better rapidly. All right, let's explore this, and dive in. So, and this actually leads me into a second question. There's about buying. So, I'm lucky in that I take the morning classes, so there's less people. So I was able to basically shift over. A lot of my students are white belts, so I was able to sort of shift it fairly quickly. Some of the more experienced guys were happy to I let them continue doing what they wanted to do, but one of them he's jumped in all in as well, which is great. And yeah, so one of the, I suppose, things that that came up was getting a buy-in of the concept and the framework up front. So is there anything that, like in your book, you say you've got to get, you've got to have your athletes and students get a good underpinning or a good understanding of the theoretical framework, but it's hard to get people who are in day-to-day life to do the same. Is there somewhere where you would start with that?
I basically take Ross Pinder, who we both work with, who was one of my students a long time ago, now works with Paralympic sport and making a huge difference in terms of their training, but also their medal count, which has no value when you start winning medals. People start to listen. But he will always talk about getting an easy win. And it might not be completely based around the principles exactly, but you might see the low-hanging fruit with somebody, and you might tweak it in relation to using a bit of constraints or something like that, and get a win. As soon as you get a win, then you get buy-in. So then it's about building relationships, coaching, isn't it? And as soon as they trust you and they see it's working, then they're more likely to go, all right, what's the next idea? Or, what else can we do? And
sorry, go for it.
Okay.
I was just going to say, very much so. Even with the more experienced guys, I think as they saw the white belts just become so much better so quickly, they sort of went, oh, okay, actually, I will start looking at the language and looking at. So I've sort of conceptualized it as experience the problem, and then if you can't find a solution for yourself, I'll try and direct you in that
Yeah.
to a solution from there. But you have to experience it first.
So I think Mike's got probably more experience of working with the AIS people. And so what did you do? Yeah.
I think one of the, again, we're on the social side of things, but I think one of the big challenges is people have expectations around what they think coaching should look like and what learning should look like. And often, some of the ecological approaches, like you mentioned, you're setting problems for athletes where you're not necessarily telling them how to solve it, which is the whole point, right? You want them to try and self-regulate and figure out themselves and attune to the relevant information sources for that. But that can be uncomfortable if you've never experienced it before as an athlete, or if you don't understand why you're doing it. So like often working with coaches trying to implement these approaches, it's kind of, as Ian said from Ross, it's trying to get some small wins, but it's also, I think, explaining, why you're taking this approach and the benefits that you're anticipating they'll see. Because I think one of the challenging things with motor learning is if you're just doing reps of something, you're probably going to get better. But, we're not just after getting better, we're after getting better as quickly and efficiently as possible in ways that are actually going to transfer to competition. And some of those small wins really come from the athletes experiencing the transfer, into those more competition specific tasks. Like, I think they're good places to look for some wins. Yeah.
I think that's really important, is that, in the end, why are you here? To help people get better at winning fights, I presume, or are they? So here's that old dilemma of, do we teach people movements or do we teach them to win the fight?
Yeah.
What is your intention as a coach? What is your goal as a coach? Well, and what is it as a performer? Well, if you're competitive, you want to win the fight. So how do I win the fight? Well, I need to be doing things in training that are more like they are in the fight. So it comes back then to the ideas of representative learning design, or making it look and feel like the real thing. So I always talk about, if you're watching a training session and you can't see that looking like a fight or a race, why are you doing it? What is the purpose of it? So the first thing is getting your intentions right and being very clear about what you're trying to do, and also making sure the player or the fighter, is it player or what do you call them?
Yeah, player, practitioner.
Whatever. Are their goals in line with what your goals are? So it's really important that you co-create this and actually, talk to them and ask them what their goal is. And if it's about, I want to perfect this move, you go, well, why? Because I think that's going to lead to me winning the fight. Well, that we can perfect this by removing the opponent and helping you learn it. But is it going to help you get better? So there's some discussions around the value of what you're doing in training. And then when you're designing your session with them, here's my goal. Can I now design an environment which invites them to take those opportunities? Like, you shape the environment to help them try and achieve that problem. So can they pick up those affordances, the opportunities that this rules or this game that you've designed for them? Can they take that? Well, no, the answer is yes or no. If they can take it, brilliant. Now we move on, and we move on to another problem or challenge it. If they can't, why not? Well, first of all, can they see the opportunity that's offered them? So this has been able to pick up the information. I thought that was a really nice way you talked about being in flow. It enables you to be more tightly coupled to the information in the environment to exploit it then. So first of all, you have to learn to be attuned to this information. You need to pick it up. And then once you've got it, it's being able to exploit it. To win, to execute. Okay, if they can't do that, if they can't see it, what could I do in the constraint, or what could I manipulate in the rules or in the fight to help it become more obvious, to exaggerate the affordance a little bit more, the invitation? Then hopefully they'll be able to pick that up. Okay, and then when they can pick it up, now can they execute it? Can they exploit it? Well, if no, again, so is there some constraint I could adjust to help them solve that problem? And then that becomes an iterative problem as you're going through. And I think one of the key challenges for the constraint model is that there are so many constraints you could manipulate to try and change behavior. It's picking up the one that is going to work. So I mean, in the language, it's, if we can find one constraint that leads to behavior change from A to B, it's a control. We call it a control parameter or control constraint. So if I manipulate distance between the interpersonal distance between the two fighters, I can probably get a different way of fighting emerge by manipulating that. And I can manipulate that by decreasing the width of the map or the size of the map. So I can create different, I make it bigger, I can get, you know, IDP changes. If I make it tighter, I can change it from there.
And I think one of the other challenges with the CLA approach as well is that you're not going to get it right the first time. Like, it does take a lot of trial and error and iteration. So like, that's one of the ones for coaches, is that, you know, you're not going to get it right the first time, but the more you play with it and tinker, and I think coaches implementing CLA are a lot like scientists. They're hypothesis testing, trialing stuff, and then trying to interpret what's just happened and then adapt and adjust and go again. So I think it does just take a lot of iteration and reflection.
So that becomes, you then become a creative and innovative coach, where you're testing, as Mike said, you're testing different ideas. What happens if I manipulate the size of the map? What happens if I manipulate the length of the fight? What happens if I manipulate the score? Etc., etc. And I think coaches find this hard because they're not used to doing it. So one thing I think, if you're like doing some coach education, is to get them all in a room, ask them to come up with problems that they typically see. Right? And then go, right, what constraint, and ask each one, just write this down. What constraint could we manipulate that might lead to as helping you overcome that problem? And if you've got 6 in the room and 6 of them write their own idea down and then put it in the middle, now we can look at it and go, actually, we never thought of that. That's a great idea. You know, rather than trying to generate it on your own, this is collective creativity. You know, it's collective problem solving, and the more ideas you generate, the more, and it might sound really strange and stupid, but it might work. You know, sometimes but it's purposeful design. And the beauty is then go, okay, let's go and test these ideas. Let's go and try them. And the thing is, like, you might not get it right immediately, but you might be on the way. So which Mike talks about the iterations, and therefore, as a coach, you become an explorer to discover these solutions, just in the same way that you're hoping that your performers are going to be. They're going to explore. As soon as you're fighting somebody, I need to find out what this person offers me as quickly as possible. And once I've found that out, then I can exploit it. That's just like with coaching, is can we explore the environment, the design, the manipulation of constraints, and find the key for that one. And of course, then you've got to be careful, because it might work for that individual, but not the next one, you know, because you will get unique and individual solutions. And that's a real key to the whole approach, isn't it? The individualization is that, you know, people want to get to the gold medal, but how you get there is your own journey, you know, and what you do to achieve it. You know, like, just think about the hard constraint is, if you're driving a car, is to stop at the red light. But there are different ways to stop at that red light. I can come up like a boy racer and hit it and go bang and smash the brakes on at the last minute, or I can be an old man and really come down slowly and actually never have the red light, because I just pace it so it's turned green by the time we get, you know. So there are different ways to get to Rome, as they say, you know. So the overall intention is the same, but how we get there is a personal choice, or is shaped by your own individual constraints as well as those that the coach creates.
Yeah, cool. So one of the things that I see with grappling, more so than other sports, because there is a lot of environmental things, I see with grappling, because you're dealing with that individual in front of you, they also become kind of the environment as well, because you're dealing, everything is perception action to what they're doing. So it's a concept I'm sort of playing with, and I'm not sure where to go with it. But the other way I look at it is sort of areas of grappling. For example, on the ground, there's all the ground game, but then there's, say, the guard game, the control game, and whatever, the standing game, that sort of thing. But then I kind of conceptualize it as spheres. So there's the entirety of it, then there's a section of it, and then there's something that we can constrain around, and then there's the core around that we can work off. Do you find that is there kind of a prescription, I suppose, for beginners where it's like we just want to have one singular affordance, or is it, let's just try, is it again test and measure?
Well, what are the rules? So what are the overall rules? How do you win?
So you win by submitting, essentially breaking a limb or making someone unconscious. So
yes, okay.
So lots of fun.
Like a night out in Melbourne. So if those are the rules that you're eventually going to be playing to, like, how do you build that up to that? So where do you start with a beginner? So, with your white belts, what does a win look like for a white belt? Or are you just fighting another white belt and beat them? And if you beat, or do you have to beat a yellow belt or whatever to become a yellow belt? I don't know how it works. So
yeah, well, I suppose it's the linear system is very fluid in the grappling world, in the BJJ world. I've got to stop saying grappling because there are other arts, but the linear system is not necessarily that linear, right. Because there's not sort of a set amount of techniques. The reason why I look at BJJ as having become a little bit more stagnant and traditional in their approach is that, when someone approaches with this idea of, constraints led, or even just situational sparring and figuring it out, having the emergent behaviors figure it out, I suppose. But the traditional approach, one of the things that drew me to BJJ was the fact that they were always pressure testing. They were always testing what the hypothesis was. But now it seems as though they're like, well, we have the source. You come to us for the source, and then we will give you a prescription. Now go and find the problem, or go and find the issue. And you've got this massive world of grappling to go and find this tiny issue that you've got the prescription for. Whereas what I've found with the constraints-led approach is I can design an environment or design the representative learning design, trying to use the words here. But I can design that, and then they can sort of find similar concepts all the way through. So, I want to keep their head to my chest. If they're on top of me in guard, well, that's because I want to break their opportunity for, posturing up and getting out of my guard. So, yeah, it's kind of lost my train of thought there, but
for me, who's in front of you? So you've got a complete beginner, let's say, but they're a farmer or they're a construction worker, and they've got massive strength. And you say that to them, you've just got to get this person on their back and hold them there for 3 seconds, and you've won. Okay, off you go. And if it's somebody who's maybe not as physically powerful and strong, do they need any particular technique to get them off their feet? I don't know. Like, you just do it, I presume. But what about the other kid? Right. Okay, so you're going to lose. Right. How do we help you not get thrown? Or how do we help you to find ways of staying on your feet? So that might become the starting point for what you do in terms of the rules. You know, I don't honestly, it's fun. It'd be fun to try to design it, I think, because I don't have any history of it, but I can look at what the rules are and what the goals are, and I think you build from that. So breaking it up into parts, I don't think is you know, we're going to learn a bit of this today, learn a bit of that today, learn a bit of that. You learn the piece as it emerges, as you see. Actually, now I need to teach them, or I need to help them develop some strategies to get out of holes, or to not be thrown, or whatever it was. But you look at that from where that person is at that moment in time, and therefore we want them to come back. So we don't actually want to kill them this week, you know. So we need to match the task to their current level of ability. Yeah. So, you know, and so we've got to be very careful of that. And I think that's where your variability comes in terms of, you know, different types of opponents that you give them. You know, be very selective in terms of the way that you do that, and the problems that person presents them. So you might go, this person is ready for playing this player, fighting this person, because they can do this and they can't at the moment. I don't think they can handle that. So I'm going to make you fight them. Now that reveals to you and to them what they need to work on next. So this constant idea of the rate limiter, you know, what is stopping them being better at this moment in time? Yeah. So Mike.
Oh no, I was just going to say I liked Sam's approach earlier, where he spoke about setting problems. Like, I think it's the same at any level. You know, regardless of how skilled you are, it's, you know, what problems does this person right now need to learn to solve? And obviously, the way you set those problems is going to look very different for a beginner to an expert. But I think the principle still holds pretty strong, right?
I think as well that what I've found in the last few weeks is if I can constrain it enough that there is a specific task, it doesn't necessarily because of the constraints being that it's something so singular. So, for example, I need to grab someone's head, put it on my chest, and hold it for 3 seconds. Right? This is the game. Anyone can do that. From number one, from someone who's been doing it for 10 years to someone who's been doing it for 10 minutes. They will eventually figure it out, because they don't have to worry about the myriad of other things that can occur. They've just got to figure out how to get that to their body. And I mean, obviously there are sort of positions or points where in that task where they're going to struggle against someone who's got 10 years experience, because that person has done it 1,000 times. But when you bring their attention to, hey, maybe you need to get your legs higher or something like that, and they do it, that level of it's something that they've completed, a task that they've completed. They feel good about it, and you know it improves their learning experience, I suppose.
And I think if you're looking to progress that as well, like, because that's it, right? Like, once they can kind of achieve that, it's like, well, how do we keep progressing them and pushing them forward? And like, I think that's where a task analysis becomes really important. So a bit like the constraints builder that you probably have seen from Ian, it's actually, you know, having a really good understanding of what that skill looks like in competition and all the constraints that act upon it. Because like, all of a sudden, like I find that, you know, we mentioned some of the barriers to constraints-based coaching is that it requires creativity, but just by brain dumping all these things that influence that particular skill, you know, getting someone's head to your chest, it's like there's a bunch of things that can happen before or can happen after that, you know, that are straight away. If you can jot them all down and understand the task from competition, well, shit, there's some training manipulation straight away as well.
Yeah, awesome.
I think you just got to control the amount of variability that you want to add in, haven't you? That's a repetition without repetition. So you can choose how much variability you want to provide for them. So, you know, like you can almost over constrain and give them no variability. You know, this is going to be the one way you can do this, or you can expand that out. And of course, that again has to be matched to the level of the person.
Yeah.
There was a point before around how many affordances you might build in. Like, I'm interested in maybe your perspective on that, Ian. Like maybe a training task like that. How many? Like, I kind of feel like you have to build in more than one. Like, you need to have options there, right?
I think they've always got to allow an element of decision making, haven't you?
Yeah.
How many choices do you want to provide by that environment? I guess
So-
it's essential, but
So I could be wrong with how I'm doing it, but the way I've started to, like, the way it's sort of evolved to at the moment is, for example, that one where I've got them in guard, I've got to get their head on the chest. There's a couple of things that they need to do in order to do that. So I'm looking for emergent behavior from that, where they maybe get the arm across the body or however they do it. But what I'm looking to do is have that as the base so that they can then see, oh, well, I can go around the back here, or I could go here, but I'm not doing that task at the moment. And then the next lesson or whatever, I then add that secondary thing in. So now I'm building around this one sort of core thing.
So-
Does that?
I think you got to be. There's where I think you need a couple of options. If you say you must go around and do it this way, then the opponent knows that as well.
Yes.
So they're going to make sure they counter that, which might leave the other option wide open
Yes.
to explore, as long as you allow them to take that other option. So there's a big danger sometimes of over prescribing or over constraining to say, I'm looking for this particular behavior. It's a bit like if we said in rugby, you get 5 points for scoring in the touchline, for getting wide, because we want to encourage the attack to spread the ball and pass the ball and play as a team. Okay, well, what would you do as a defender if there was 5 points for scoring out wide and 1 point under the post? You defend the wide areas. Okay, so now where's the space in the middle? Okay, but if we don't allow them, so we've got to be very careful if we go, this is the way I want you to do it. I think we've always got to give a couple of, find different ways of doing it or allowing them to solve it in a way that suits them. Because otherwise I always talk about if you want to constrain the attack, if you want to work on attack, constrain the defenders. If you want to work on defenders, constrain the attackers. So what you might say is you're working with player A. Player B is your stooge, your assistant. And you just say to them, I want you to fight it by doing this, this, and this. I don't want you to do that, whatever. And okay, then the person you're working with then has to work that out, and solve that from there. So they provide the problem, don't they? You use them to set the problem up. Now, how are you going to beat that? Yeah,
that makes sense. That's taking me back to some work with volleyball, Ian, where we're working on blocking with a particular athlete, and one of the challenges is they traditionally you teach blocking by you stand on a big box and the coach stands on a box on the other side and just whacks balls at you, and you just keep repetition, block, and that's your blocking practice. But we tried to keep all the information together, because when you do a task analysis, you realize actually there's a lot of information over there that they use. They're looking at the setter, they're looking at the ball trajectory and how it's coming out, they're looking at the hitter who's running in, their angle of attack, all this information from their arm and stuff. And we're like, we probably need to keep that there somehow, but how can we make it as simple as possible in these early stages of learning? So how can we simplify it? And that's where we came up with ideas of trying to keep setter and hitter closer together, so you don't have to keep moving your head as far, and then also limiting where the attacker could hit. They always had options, but early on it was never more than 2 or 3. So it's you're only kind of looking as a blocker for these 2 or 3 options. It's not complex, and that your whole affordance landscape's available. You're just narrowing it in here for search.
Cool. I've got and if you guys need to go, let me know.
I've got to go. Well, I've got another meeting at 1, so
Okay,
whatever time it is yours, it's 12:30 here.
I'm in Brisbane as well. So
All right, okay.
yeah, so not far. So I've got a couple of other questions. So I would say grappling, I'm on the beginner coach area, sort of end of the spectrum. With striking, I would say I'm a higher intermediate striker. Now, if I want to learn something, do you think it would be a good idea for me to have a look at my problems? So, for example, I'm a southpaw. When I had my fight years ago, I got blasted in the face numerous times by a straight down the center, gave me stitches and everything. And it was because I just had no answer for it, because I'd been taught the linear sort of methodology, and I'd been taught as an orthodox. So I had no way of teaching myself, and I had no way of learning, because no one was able to teach me. So I'm wondering if I could sort of teach myself using CLA, and would you recommend that over going to a coach and learning the linear method?
I think there's a couple of things that sit behind this. Is what makes you good? What are your strengths? And what are you good at? And we normally go to what can't you do rather than what can you do. But there's a whole idea of a strengths-based approach that you might want to consider. So a lot of sport, this sort of comes from an idea from business, or a guy called Jim Collins, From Good to Great, a book. What are your strengths? What are your super strengths? So what is it that makes you special as a player? And obviously, if you're not very special, then it's going to be something that you're good at. So let's
put me on the spot.
So I remember reading, I don't know whether you know cricket at all, there's a guy called Joe Root who's reasonably good for England. And he came out here in his first ever tour, and his first innings was in a rabid gabba just after lunch, as England were falling apart, and the noise, Mitchell Johnson was bowling rockets and killing people, and he walked out to bat in the noise. I thought, if he lasts more than 10 minutes here, he's a genius, because the atmosphere was incredible and difficult. And he went, listened to something he said, and he said after that he went away. He got dropped towards the end of the series, and he went away and he tried to work on his weaknesses, and he worked out that he should be better off spending more time on what's made him brilliant in the first place, and working on those. But of course, there are some things that have to reach a minimal level, otherwise you can't survive. You're going to metaphorically die. So for you, it would be how do I stop that punch down the middle that hits me in the hooter? So if I can't do that, I'm not going to survive. So I've got to find a way of doing that in the first place. So and then it's about, well, what are my options? How do I not get hit in the hooter? First of all, well, actually, I'm really quick. I'm really fast on my feet, and I can dance. So I'm never going to get in range to get popped. I mean, that's a simplistic and silly idea, but if you don't want to get hit in the nose, don't get in range. It would seem to be my way of going out in my old sparring ground of Mansfield in Nottinghamshire. You go out, don't go in the wrong pub, But so it could be that, like, so what do you do? Well, yes, how can you defend a punch down the middle? So what are your options? And you'd explore that, wouldn't you? I guess. So you might set up some fights that are at this distance that is only going to allow a jab, or we're not going to create a distance, an IDP, that's going to allow my opponent, the only way they can hit me is to jab to start with. Okay, well, how do I defend the jab? I don't know. You're the experts.
Yeah.
So,
okay. So I should go out and do constraints-led approach to learning for myself as well.
Without doubt, I think so. I mean, that's why I learned very badly to play golf, and I would taught my son to play cricket, all of these things. I would teach football. You do it on yourself and explore. It's about exploration, isn't it? Most of the time, it's about finding the information.
Yes.
So years ago in Teesside, we did a study with a third-year student who was you could kick and punch. So I don't know what would that be? Taekwondo maybe. But what we did was we created video footage of him doing different punches or different kicks, and then we used what we call temporal occlusion. So we put it on a video and we stopped the tape at various points. So it might be just as he's pulling his arm back, or just as he's, or the punch goes through, and then we projected this onto a life-size screen, and then got people to fight against it, and they just had to block the quadrant where the attack was coming from. And what he realized from doing it was that he telegraphed his punch. So prior to making a punch, he took a step back with his right foot.
Right.
So basically, he learned himself that he was telling his opponent a long time before the punch arrived, now the punch is coming. So he learned out of that, he went, actually, I need to stop doing that and giving my opponent the clues. So it might be that information, your opponent gives you that information. This is that perceptual attunement to the key information, isn't it? And I'm sure the best fighters can see what's coming or can read their opponent's actions. A long time, it's like it's a temporal advantage, isn't it? You pick up the early information that allows you to counter it or to get it. So for you, how do I know when the punch is coming? Where's the punch coming?
Yeah.
And if I manipulate that distance and to start with only give them the option of a jab, and then after time, all right, I'm going to move it in a little bit so that you can do a jab or a cross or a uppercut, whatever. Now I can expand it all, but I know what the information looks like when they're going to punch me straight in the nose down the middle.
Yeah.
I think that example of that study you did, Ian, it's a good example, I think, of how the constraints do shape our actions and behaviors too. Like, I haven't done that much temporal occlusion stuff. So temporal occlusion is where you basically black out at a certain point of the action. So you've got to anticipate what's happening and where it's going.
I've seen the football player doing the header and it out just before he does.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. Like, I've done some stuff with tennis recently with that, and I haven't done a lot of it. But what I found this really useful was the constraints on task really force search for information, and in ways that you probably don't really experience if you're worried about getting punched in the head, or you've got to worry about the action response as well. Like, I felt like people were searching in ways that they wouldn't normally within the real task. But obviously then we're also worried about how we transfer that back into more of a coupled task. But I thought it was interesting and had merit, because like we'd probably call that educating attention, when you're trying to draw people's attention to more useful and relevant information sources.
I think that's really important for you as the coach, is that you might be able to see that this opponent is giving it away.
Yes.
You can tell it, but they can't.
Yeah.
So there's very little point in, unless you're in a fight for a gold medal, and they still couldn't see it, then I would tell. I'd be going, watch it, when he does this, he's going to do that. But as part of learning, you want them to spot that information, don't you? You want to, so that's what Mike is talking about, is directing their search. What can you see? What does their foot tell you? What does their movement look like in the seconds prior to a fight? Or without telling them the answer, is narrow the search for them. Like direct them to a particular mate. And you've got to be careful with that a lot of the time, that it's not standard. So in cricket, when you're looking at wrist spin bowling, everybody's look at the wrist and the release position. That's fine if they are a normal bowler, but if they're unique and got some really weird stuff going on, often you can be directing them to the wrong part of information.
Yeah.
So the guy called Muralitharan who got 700 wickets, and it wasn't the wrist you needed to watch, it was the elbow. It was where the elbow was pointing.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
when you direct them here, you're not, they're missing the key information. So you have to be careful about over directing or over constraining the instructions. And as you said, it's about building awareness. You know, you want them to be searching. You wanted them to become a gatherer of information, a searcher for information. And so kids are born with as active perceivers. You know, like you've got your little one, they're just inquisitive, they're into everything, they're finding it all out. Through the education system over time, we knock that out of people. We make them passive receivers of information. So as a coach, can you create active perceivers of picking up information? So this is where you can manipulate your opponent, isn't it? I want you to over exaggerate this. You know, before you go to punch them, I want you to take a step back. Can they pick up that information? Can they tell you, like, it's writing you a telegram. It's old-fashioned way. Here's an early signal that I'm sending you a punch. You know, so and it might be then. So they start to look for that sort of information.
So one of my students, he asked what would be what would be something that you'd recommend for visualization. Would you think that there's much need for visualization as a student, or because I've found that visualization for me has gone through the roof. I'm 2 to 3 hours a day thinking about like the next lesson and how I'm going to get to the core of it and how I'm going to create so I have to be mentally in the game for that time. But for a student, it seems as though that might not be beneficial, or I might be wrong. So what's your thoughts on visualization sort of tactics for?
Well, I mean, a while ago, I did quite a bit of reading around not visualization, but imagery. So
Okay.
I think you can be careful in terms of visualization just means seeing it.
Yep.
Whereas imagery can be multisensory. So you can feel it, you can hear it, you can see it, etc., etc., etc. So the best imagery, or the evidence for the best imagery, is when you build up use all the senses.
Okay.
So you write imagery scripts that go, and I could feel the contact on the opponent's coat or whatever. I could hear the feet, and you talk about that, Mike. You can hear the patterns of feet, and they give you information. You can hear the scuffling on the feet. So I think it's really valuable is to use that sort of information, but to build it rather than just be more than visualization. But again, it's about practicing picking up information, isn't it? So I think I'd be linking it to who I'm fighting next. You know, I'd be finding as much footage as I can of those people fighting and trying to pick up the information about them, and then see myself as the opponent. You know, see myself, I don't know, that's how I would be going about it. So I'd be doing pre-play, almost instant pre-play.
I think it's a really nice option in context where you can't get many repetitions in of something. So if you're fighting someone, who you can't go and train on the mat with them, actually the only way you can maybe expose yourself to this person is watching some video and doing some imagery. Like we've done some work with gymnastics recently with a high bar athlete, and they do these releases on the high bar where they're going around and around, flip and do a skill and then have to catch again. And, at the end of the day, they can only do so many repetitions of it a week. And so trying to improve on that skill is tough. So like we worked with the sports psychologist on creating an imagery script for them so they could try and get some more, relevant repetitions into. And I think the aim of that is to then enrich and enhance your opportunities when you're actually doing the real task.
You got to be careful. It does, when you do it, it looks and feels that it would in your head. I think that's always a danger, isn't it? You might think, I'm going to fight this person, and as soon as you grab them, you realize they're far stronger than you thought, or they're not, they're not molding as you'd expect them to do. But there's a brilliant book. It's quite an old book by Siren Connolly on, I can't remember the exact title of it, but it's one of the best books on imagery that I've come across.
Siren, was it?
John Syer, S-Y-E-R, and Connolly. And it's got all the different types of imagery in there as well, the ways that you can use it. So one thing I've used when I was playing was rewriting the script. So changing the ending. So you go back to, a situation and you change it in your own head. So it's motivationally, I think it's quite powerful. I can remember seeing myself succeed on a couple of grounds where I'd never got runs before. And I played that through in my head. And by total chance or by design or whatever, I happened to score some runs the following year. But it was a deliberate point. This is the only ground I'm not got a 50 on or whatever. So I could see myself, but I could put myself in that environment because I knew it. I knew I could smell it, I could see it, I could feel it. I knew who was going to bowl. I knew the conditions, So I think it has some value, but obviously it's better to fight if you can. And that comes back to who you can get to represent your opponent, isn't it?
Yeah.
Can I bring in somebody who's most like the person I'm going to have to fight, or get them to fight as they would fight?
And we did some of this work leading into Rio, because I think one of the good things about Olympic combat sports is generally there might only be 16 athletes that get selected to go, and they do the draw a fair way out. So you actually can have a really good understanding of, or predict, at least from rankings, who you're going to be fighting in the first few rounds. So like some basic performance analysis, or even just watching fights and taking notes, like you start to build a profile of opponent fighting styles and preferences. And then we worked really hard to try and recreate and simulate that in training, through bringing in athletes who we think can mimic that style, who have the same sort of body shapes and sizes or physical attributes, but then could also fight in similar ways too. And that was a really successful and really great way of preparing for the games.
I mean, to put it like, I was working with a coach in England a couple of years ago who took some kids out to India, very high level kids, and they practiced against each other. And he said it took him 2 days to realize that our bowlers need to face Indian batsmen because their ability to play spin is far better than the English kids' ability. He said, I wasted 2 days. I realized my opponent, even in practice, I need to bring I need to switch it over. Which the other danger I think Mike found in his study is that people don't want to hurt their mates, so they fight differently. Unless there's some vicious vindictive.
And I think as well, like the task is always the primary learning activity for me. It's these other things around it which maybe can enhance and enrich the experience and support the experience in the task, but the task is still the primary learning vehicle.
I don't think the low-hanging fruit for me that we don't do enough of is scenarios, little short scenarios of situations. And if you can't come up with those scenarios, the easiest thing to do, I think, is you get a dice and you put the scenarios on the side of the dice, 6 different scenarios on a dice, you roll it, that's what we're playing. That's what we're having a go at. And then repeat. If it's a short piece, you can repeat that 2 or 3 times. And then the role of the coach changes in that. He's like, okay, here's the scenario. What are you going to do? How are you going to try and win this scenario? And they can go, well, I'm going to try and do this. Right, go. Let's have a go. Okay, they have a go. And then you go, right, how did you go? What did you do well? Like I did this. What did you do what you planned? No. Okay, so what could we do differently next time? Right, let's go and do it again. And you can do that, and you can repeat. Now you can learn. You get speed up learning so fast. So in cricket, I have 1 over games. You've got 1 over, and we play it like tennis. So if you win the over, you're 1-0 up. If I win the over as the coach or the field, it's 1-1. And you can have, you play 3 sets to 6, you can have 18, 20 really short learning opportunities. Rather than traditionally in cricket, you make a mistake, you're out, that's it. We don't get another go for another week.
Cool.
So here, if you had 30-second bouts or 1-minute bouts, and here's what we're working on, here's the scenario. You're getting thrown too easily. You're getting put on the deck too easily. You can go through a whole minute here without being on the deck, you win. But I'm putting you on a small map. So you can't.
That's just you've actually just unlocked something. So I've been trying to figure out how to, because there's a particular stand-up / to grappling. So getting into a connection where you can grapple versus a striking situation, and I've been trying to figure out like how I can combine the striking game that I had with the grappling game, and because I'm not using actual impact as in striking, I'm just using distance and touch, but that there's no consequence if someone's just touching your shoulder. There's no consequence to go running in and grabbing the leg. So we could say that touching the shoulder is a one point, but getting the arms around the midsection is 10 points.
And you can manipulate those points depending on what you want to work on.
Correct. Yeah, that's great. There you go. Got a piece of practical advice straight in that I can use straight away. Awesome. Well, guys, I'm conscious of time. I don't want to. I really appreciate both of you coming on and talking to me about this. I hope I get the opportunity in the future to keep communicating with you guys.
Sorry, to hear your journey. See what as you develop and use it more. What some of the challenges, some of the problems. It'd be great to keep in touch and find out more.
Yeah, awesome. So I've got one final thing that I'll just ask, just because, as I said, I am speaking to a number of coaches that are, and they've all got very similar things. They're all insecure about whether their CLA practice is actually good or not. Is there anything that you could kind of give them that would be give them a bit of motivation to continue?
I think, if one of the things that you want from your learners is to be vulnerable and to be willing to make mistakes, or I reframe mistakes as another way of finding out how not to do it, or as part of exploration. It's the same as a coach. You want the coach to be going, just have a go. If it doesn't work, you put your hand up and go, sorry, that was a stupid one. We'll move on. And I think the players often appreciate that as well. But don't over constrain either. Just keep it simple. Just keep it around that idea of representativeness. I think that's the most important bit. And then we can see then what the problems emerge. And then it's the manipulation of constraints that come out of that. That's how you help that process. But think of first of all, how real can I keep this? Obviously sometimes you're going to change it, but if you're getting behaviors that don't look like they would in a fight, something's wrong.
Yeah.
I think I don't have too much to add from what Ian said. I would absolutely reinforce everything he said, but I think one of the pieces of motivation is, you're not going to get it right all the time, but when you do get it right, what do the responses from your athletes look like?
Yeah.
How are they feeling, thinking, experiencing, enjoying their practice activities? Because when you get it right, I guarantee they'll be super engaged and really enjoying their practice activities.
Yeah. And we hear a lot about this struggle, creating struggle that people have to go through struggle. Don't be stupid with that. Go away, always, a friend of mine, Tony Olden, a brilliant sports psychologist. When they arrive, I want them to feel brilliant. When they leave, I want them to feel confident and brilliant. In the middle, I'm going to put the shitty bit, make it harder. But I want them to go away feeling as though like they're good and they can fight. So you don't have to kill them all the time. Give them an easy win, or make them go away thinking that they're actually not the world's worst fighter or things like that.
Yeah,
I like that too. I actually also really like. I think Tony was on that paper with you on self-regulation and like the message in that is amazing. Like that's why I think you also persevere with that approach. I don't know if you want to quickly talk about that Ian, but like the competency element, I think, and the link with representative design.
Yeah, I mean, it's self-determination theory, basically the idea that people like you to show how good they are. They want to show you their competence. They like autonomy. They like to have choices, which is why we look to co-create and design. So if they choose what to do in the session, they're more likely to be engaged in it and buy in than if you impose it on them when they're going, I don't want to work on that, or I don't need to work on that. And of course, there's some times where that might need some negotiation. And the other part of it is the relatedness or the connection between each other as fighters, as the squad, but also between you and the coach. And I think the important thing about this approach is that you become, I've heard it called it back, but you're a servant coach. You're there for them. You're everything about them, rather than, and you work with them to help them get better, not tell them all the time what they're doing wrong. And they're creating that negative, like, oh God, it's like, as one of my students said earlier, it's like your mum telling you you're off all the time. When somebody comes in to tell you all the errors you're making, it's like being at home and having your mother in your ear. So that's basically,
Excellent. Well, any other projects that you guys want to sort of say to the people, or
not at the moment? I'm going to have to go to this next meeting. It's with the boss, so I've got to go.
Okay, no worries. Well, thanks very much for your time, Ian. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thanks for having us on. Thank you.
Excellent.
All right,
thanks, guys. Cheers.
Okay. Thanks, Sam. Thanks for having us. It was good to
really
chat.
Appreciate it,
and as Ian mentioned, keep in touch. Always happy to hear about and love hearing about coaches' journeys as they start exploring CLA and ecological dynamics.
Well, hopefully I'm getting better at the delivery. At the moment, it can be a little dry, and I even have a little note in the bottom of the screen saying, put it on 2-speed because I've got a slow Aussie drawl. But but yeah, I'll send that link through. And if there is anything that you want me to post alongside the video, let me know. I'm more than happy to do so.
Cool. Thanks, Sam. Have a great day.
Thanks a lot,
mate.
mate. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.